A 2020 Honda Rebel 500 costs $6,499. The 2026 Rebel 500 costs $6,799. That's a $300 difference over 6 years. Meanwhile, riders online are convinced the exact opposite is happening, that motorcycles have become almost impossible to justify, that dealers are quietly stacking cost after cost onto every sale, that the hobby itself is slowly pricing people out. So if the bike itself barely moved, why do so many riders still walk out of the dealership feeling like they just got ambushed? Between 2020 and 2025, overall United States consumer prices rose by roughly the low 20% range. That's inflation, the price of groceries, rent, gasoline, almost everything, creeping upward year after year. Now compare that to the bikes riders are actually buying. From model year 2020 to model year 2026, the Rebel 500 moved just 4.6%. The Kawasaki Ninja 650 moved even less, about 2.7%. Two of the most popular motorcycles in America, both increasing at a fraction of general inflation. So if the machines barely got more expensive and riders still feel blindsided at the counter, the sticker price was never the real story. Something else is happening. And it starts with one rider who did everything right. Picture a rider, call him Jake, a composite of a very common story, not one specific person. Jake's been eyeing a Rebel 500 for a year. He pulls up the spec sheet, $6,799. He's done his homework. He knows that's barely more than the bike cost back in 2020. He's seen the online arguments about motorcycles getting insanely expensive, and he's quietly proud of himself for not falling for it. He walks into the dealership feeling like he's ahead of the game, the smart buyer, the one who checked the numbers before showing up. 2 hours later, he's signing paperwork for a number that doesn't look anything like $6,799. And he's not being scammed. Nobody lied to him. Every number on that paperwork was disclosed somewhere, in some font, at some point during the process. He just didn't know that the number on the spec sheet was never the number he'd actually pay, because that number was never designed to be complete. It was designed to be the starting point of a conversation that has 2 more chapters nobody warned him about. Jake's story is the story of almost every rider who's ever felt confused walking out of a dealership. It's not that the motorcycle changed, it's that there are 3 completely different prices hiding inside one purchase, and nobody hands you a receipt that separates them for you. You have to go looking. Before we follow Jake through the rest of his story, here's a quick gut check for you. Out of the 3 prices about to unfold, the sticker, the counter, and the financing, which one do you think does the most damage? Drop your guess in the comments before you keep watching, and we'll come back to see who called it right. And if you're the kind of rider who wants to actually understand moments like this, instead of just feeling frustrated by them afterward, subscribe. This is exactly the kind of ownership story Throttle Insider breaks down every week. All right, let's start exactly where Jake started, with the spec sheet. The number Jake researched, the MSRP, turns out to be the most honest one in the entire transaction, at least for a bike like his. The Rebel 500, ABS, moved from $6,499 to $6,799 across 6 years. The Kawasaki Ninja 650 moved from $7,399 to $7,599, just 2.7%. Both landed well under the pace of inflation. For ordinary, unchanged models, manufacturers mostly held the line. But Jake's co-worker rides a street glide, and he is convinced motorcycles have gotten wildly more expensive because his bike's starting price jumped from about $21,999 in 2020 to $24,999 today, roughly 13.6%. The BMW GS tells a similar story, $17,895 for the 2020 R 1250 GS versus $21,490 for today's R 1300 GS, a 20.1% jump. Here's the part that keeps Jake and his coworker from actually agreeing with each other. They are not describing the same kind of motorcycle. The current R1300 GS is a genuine redesign, new engine, new chassis, new electronics. The current Street Glide received real mechanical and electronic changes from the 2020 version. You cannot fairly compare a redesigned motorcycle to its 6-year-old ancestor and call the gap just inflation. Some of it is new engineering, tangled up with everything else. Zoom out from Jake and his co-worker for a second, and you can see the pattern repeating across the entire industry. Bikes that stayed mechanically the same barely moved in price. Bikes that got fundamentally rebuilt jumped hard, because in a very real sense, they are not the same motorcycle anymore, just wearing a familiar name. Zoom back in, and that is exactly why two riders standing in the same parking lot can have completely opposite opinions about whether motorcycles got expensive, and both be telling the truth about their own bike. And this is the same reason flagship trims distort how the whole market feels. A high-spec CVO or special edition sitting at the top of a lineup is not proof that base models got more expensive. It is proof that manufacturers built a more expensive version and put it where everyone would see it first. In the showroom window, in the YouTube thumbnails, in the forum signature photos. Jake's co-worker is judging the entire industry by the most expensive bike in the room, the one that gets talked about the most precisely because it is the most dramatic. Worth noting too, broader cost pressures like tariffs and emissions compliance sit somewhere behind these numbers as well, real, but not measurable enough to explain them on their own, and nowhere near the size of a genuine redesign. So MSRP alone does not explain Jake's dealership shock. His bike barely moved, which means the ambush happened somewhere else. Here's where Jake's story actually turns. He is standing at the counter, feeling good about his research, and then the paperwork lands in front of him. The $6,799 on the spec sheet becomes $7,399 before he has signed anything because of a $600 destination charge, adding almost 9% before tax, or a single dealer fee. It is not hidden exactly, it is printed right there on the form. But nobody mentioned it when Jake was doing his homework online, because destination charges rarely make it into the number a manufacturer advertises loudest. That is not unique to Jake's bike. A 2026 Honda XR150L carries the same pattern proportionally. A $300 destination charge on a $3,399 motorcycle. Some brands go further still. Selected 2026 BMW motorcycles carry a flat $1,095 destination and handling charge, regardless of trim. Notice what that flat structure does. A $600 or $1,095 charge barely dents a $25,000 Street Glide. Jake's co-worker probably did not even notice it in his paperwork. On Jake's $6,799 Rebel, that same style of charge is a real percentage of the total. Fixed fees do not scale down with the motorcycle, so the riders with the tightest budgets, buying the cheapest bikes, absorb the biggest proportional hit. The system is not designed to punish Jake specifically. It just happens to land hardest on exactly the buyer least equipped to shrug it off. Beyond destination, there is often a dealer prep fee, maybe an accessory quietly folded into the invoice, a set of grips, a cover, something that sounded reasonable in the moment. There is no reliable national average for how much that adds. It varies dealership to dealership, but it can meaningfully inflate one specific transaction, and it lands hardest on exactly the buyers Jake represents, the ones buying the cheaper bike precisely because they are watching every dollar. Jake did not get scammed here either. Destination charges are disclosed. But disclosed is not the same as expected, and this is the first real crack in his math. This is the price that never appears on a sticker or an invoice. Jake signs it, drives home, and forgets about it for years, right up until it quietly finishes doing its work. It shows up on a loan document, and it does its damage slowly, one payment at a time, long after the excitement of the purchase has worn off. Say Jake, or anyone, finances $10,000 toward a motorcycle. At 3.99% over 60 months, that's about $1,047 in interest. At 8.54% over the same 60 months, it's roughly $2,321. Stretch the term to 84 months at 10.99%, and interest climbs to about $4,378. Same $10,000 bike. A swing of more than $3,300 decided entirely by loan terms, not the motorcycle, not the dealership, not inflation. Just the shape of the paperwork Jake signed in maybe 10 minutes at the end of a long afternoon. This isn't a hypothetical edge case either. Harley-Davidson currently advertises financing terms stretching up to 84 or 96 months on selected motorcycles. Longer terms shrink the monthly number, which is exactly why they get chosen. A smaller monthly payment feels affordable in the room, feels responsible, feels like the smart move. Nobody signs a loan thinking about the total interest line at the bottom. They compare monthly numbers to what they can comfortably spend, and they sign and they ride off. And the story feels finished. It isn't finished. That $4,378 in interest doesn't appear as one scary figure in the showroom. It appears as 30, 40, 50 small payments, spread so thin it never feels like a single decision. By the time the total becomes visible, if it ever really does, outside of a loan document most people never fully read, the purchase is years in the rearview mirror. Which is exactly why Jake's dealership shock and Jake's financing shock are two completely different moments, months or years apart, that he experiences as one confusing feeling. This cost more than I thought it would, and I still can't quite explain why. If you've ever felt that exact confusion, signing for a payment that felt fine in the moment, then adding it all up later and feeling blindsided, you're not imagining it, and you're not alone. That feeling has a mechanism behind it, and we're about to name it. Throttle Insider breaks down exactly this kind of ownership confusion every week. There's more to unpack here, so let's keep going. Here's where Jake's story splits into two very different kinds of riders. Not because one is smarter, but because they're optimizing for different things without ever naming what they're optimizing for. Some riders shop by monthly payment. To them, affordability is the monthly number. If it fits the budget, the purchase makes sense, full stop, end of analysis. Other riders shop by total cost. They'll take a higher monthly payment on a shorter term if it means paying less overall, even if it feels tighter month to month. Neither philosophy is wrong on its face. Both are internally logical, but they produce wildly different outcomes on the exact same motorcycle, and most riders don't realize which philosophy they're actually using until the loan is already signed and it's too late to switch approaches. The same split shows up in how riders read price tags in the first place. Some compare an old manufacturer's suggested retail price they remember from years back against today's fully loaded out-the-door quote and assume the entire gap is the manufacturer's fault, when part of it was always destination and fees. Others assume every line on the invoice reflects manufacturer pricing, when some of it is dealership specific and varies from one showroom to the next. And plenty of riders, like Jake's coworker, judge the affordability of the entire market by the flagship bike they see most often in videos and forums, not the base model that actually sits in most driveways, doing most of the actual commuting and weekend riding. None of these are confirmed, measured, nationwide behaviors. They're recognizable patterns, the kind of decision points that quietly shape how expensive a purchase ends up feeling long before anyone sits down and adds up the real total. Zoom out far enough, and Jake isn't really a story about one motorcycle at all. He's standing in for a much bigger group. Every rider who did the responsible thing, checked the manufacturer's suggested retail price, felt confident walking in, and still came out feeling like the ground shifted under them. Multiply that feeling across an entire industry, and you get exactly the narrative riders keep repeating to each other online: that motorcycles got expensive, that dealers cannot be trusted, that the whole hobby is drifting out of reach. Some of that frustration is earned, but most of it is aimed at the wrong number. For relatively stable models, the manufacturer's suggested retail price was only part of the affordability problem. The problem was everything riders never learned to look for around it. Jake's Rebel 500 moved $300 in 6 years. On paper, that's almost nothing. A rounding error against 6 years of everything else getting more expensive. And yet Jake felt ambushed anyway, not because the motorcycle lied to him, but because he was only ever looking at one of 3 prices. The MSRP told him the truth. the whole time. The destination charge added a number he hadn't budgeted for, printed right there on the form he barely had time to read. The financing quietly did the rest, months after he'd stopped thinking about the purchase at all, stacking thousands of dollars onto a bike that, on the spec sheet, barely moved. You may not be overpaying only for the motorcycle, you may be underestimating everything around it. Next time you're standing where Jake stood, spec sheet open, feeling like you've done your homework, don't ask what the bike costs. Ask what you're actually going to pay and over how long before you ever get to the counter. If this changed how you will read your next quote, subscribe. Throttle Insider breaks down the real economics behind motorcycle ownership every week, and there is a lot more worth understanding.